All right, everyone, I reckon we'll get started now. So if you haven't been here before, welcome to, and if you have been here before, welcome back to PTV2, a Pragmatic Thinking, one of our 3 virtual training and streaming studios here on the Gold Coast. And welcome to high-performing hybrid teams. So in this masterclass, we're going to look at the best practice and the key learnings that we've picked up over the last 3 years in partnering with organizations and leaders in the worlds of both virtual and hybrid work. Before we do that though, I do want to acknowledge the owners of all the traditional lands from which we're gathering, the traditional owners of all the lands from which we're gathering. So I'm standing on the lands of the Yugambeh people, but I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging from the lands from which we're all joining today. And I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on the call with us right now. So if you haven't met me before, my name is Ryan. I'm head of programs at Pragmatic Thinking. As you can see from the logo, we're a behavior and motivation strategy company. So we partner with organizations, with teams, and with leaders. I'm just going to pop you on mute as you figure out your AirPods. So we partner with organizations, teams, and leaders to deliver leadership training, facilitate offsites, and align cultural strategy to organizational and operational strategy. So that's what we do. The reason we do it, though, is we wholeheartedly believe that work should be an extraordinary experience. When you consider that for most of us, we spend a third of our lives doing it, and another third is going to sleep. That means we spend fully 1/2 of our waking hours at work. And I reckon the way that most of us work has shifted quite significantly over the last 3 years or so. So the conversation we're going to have today is squarely focused on how, as leaders, do we effectively lead and help our teams navigate a hybrid environment of work. So we're going to work through 3 sections of this masterclass. We're going to start off focusing on the psychology of hybrid leadership, updating our cultural operating system to meet the new context that we're working within. Then we're going to look at the methodology, so particularly rhythms we can put in place both to drive our own experience of work, but also to support cultural outcomes for our people of well-being, engagement, connection, and performance. And last of all, we're going to look at the technology of hybrid leadership, so particularly leveraging some of our tech platforms that we have available, but looking at what tools do we use for what job, and how can we create clarity within our team and ideally our organization of how we use these tools. What are the guidelines so we're maximizing each other's time? We're not leaning into 1 or 2 tools to do all the heavy lifting when there's other tools that can be used better to achieve certain outcomes. And speaking of technology, of course, we're highly reliant on it for the success of this session. So first and foremost, if you can't hear or see me properly at any point in time, please do let me know. It can sometimes be as simple as my microphone, I've knocked it and I've knocked it a little loose, so I can usually fix that quite quickly. And if you get disconnected, I'll just invite you to try to jump back on the call. If I get disconnected, I'll ask you to bear with me for a few moments. Worst case scenario, I will tether off my phone and I'll jump on my laptop and we'll complete the rest of the session that way. And look, as with our previous masterclasses, I'm keen to leverage the microphone as much as possible, but definitely the chat function because we've got north of 55 people on the call right now. So I reckon one of the benefits of a virtual learning experience is we can have 2 simultaneous conversations going. It doesn't distract me, it doesn't offend me in a bad way. So I really encourage you to leverage that chat function as much as possible. And as well as that, I'm keen to use good old-fashioned hand signals as well. It's a great way to get non-verbal feedback from a large group really quickly. So on that note, I'm going to ask you, if you haven't popped your camera on, please pop it on and leave it on as much as is practically possible for the duration of the session. I do understand it if there's something going on in the background that means that you can't have it on, but again, to the extent that you possibly can, it creates a much better experience for me. A smile, a nod, a frown, or a shake of the head tells me a great deal, and I reckon it creates a better experience for everyone else on the call as well. So again, if you can have it on, I really encourage you to have it on, and I really appreciate all the people who have popped on their cameras. It's good to see your faces. And thanks for letting us know, Ebony. I appreciate it. So I'm keen to, before we kick into the content, looking at the psychology, technology and methodology of hybrid leadership today, I'm keen to get a bit of an understanding of your experience of hybrid work, both over the last couple of years, but particularly where you found yourself in 2023. So I have two questions for you, and I'm simply going to ask you to drop your responses into the chat function, and I may ask one or two people to jump on the mic and just share with us in a little bit more detail. But the first question I have for you is simply, what is your greatest challenge in leading a hybrid team? So not the greatest challenge that you see, but for you personally, as a leader of a hybrid team, so a team that is not 100% co-located, what's the greatest challenge you experience in your leadership? And I suspect it's going to be quite different for different people on the call. Engagement and accountability, connection coming through, creating connections with an online team, missing small talk, those serendipitous conversations, scheduling in-person activities, oversight of work or accountability, missing those incidental conversations, planning social connections from Lindsay, keeping everyone motivated and working together on agreed priorities coming through there as well. So as responses continue to come through, keen to, Sonia, you've dropped in missing incidental conversations. So would you mind jumping on the mic and just sharing with us in a little bit more detail? What's the impact of that you see? What challenges does that present? It's one of the most frequent challenges that I've had shared to me over the last few years is when you think about it, for our entire existence as a species, the way that we've formed, managed and strengthened relationships is via physical proximity and the conversation and the interaction that happens in that space. So it makes complete sense that for most of us, the way that we're used to building relationships and, as you say, being collaborative, being creative and bouncing off each other, it tends to come from being in the same physical space. So as leaders of hybrid teams, we do need to be intentional, but also a little bit innovative in how we create that opportunity for building those social connections and also creating that space for that back and forth, that collaboration that often would typically be done, let's say, in a boardroom together. So thanks for sharing, Sonia. I really appreciate it. I reckon you've just given voice to the challenges of many of us on this call. And I can see that a heap of new messages have come through. So overload of emails, meetings, instead of a quick in-person chat. That's such a significant and common one that I'm not even going to read any further. Avi, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, please correct me. If I'm not, would you mind jumping on the mic and sharing with us what does that look like for you? That product of, again, for our entire existence as a species, the way we've operated, worked together, formed relationships, learned, got stuff done, is by being in the same physical space. So what we're seeing is, for most of us, we're leaning into those same ways of communicating when we're physically not together. And the challenge with that is that means we're leaning into synchronous communication to get everything done. And what would have been a quick, lean across the table and maybe a 2-minute conversation, as you say, when we have to look in someone's calendar, set up a meeting, probably set it for half an hour, we tend to all be 2 minutes late because we've just jumped off another meeting to join this meeting. That 2-minute conversation becomes 20 or 30 minutes. And the feedback that I've certainly had from leaders over the last few years is my entire 8 hours a day is filled up with video conference meetings. So when do I have the time to actually do the work that comes from those video conference meetings? And I'm seeing quite a few nods as nonverbal feedback to that. So when we look at the technology of hybrid leadership today, I'm really keen to share with you a tool, and it's a tool that I'll send through after this session that it can be incredibly useful in that space. So thanks for sharing. And can see that responses continue to come through, and we've got personal connection, informal interactions, motivation. So in the rhythms part of the workshop, I'm keen to look at what we can put in place to drive, again, engagement, motivation, well-being, and what flows from that, of course, is performance. When our state is better, then we can turn up and approach our work better. So thank you everyone for dropping your responses into the chat. Always useful to acknowledge the challenges, but I think it's also important to look at what's up for grabs if we can make hybrid work really well for us and put in place a sustainable hybrid practice. So the second question I have for you is, for you, what's the biggest benefit of hybrid work? And this doesn't have to be specific to your leadership, just for you as a human being, what's the greatest benefit of hybrid work? And we've got flexibility from Annalise, big one. Flexibility with an exclamation mark from Ebony. Flexibility and no travel. Flexibility again, dressing from the waist up. I always say I'm often the human mullet when I work from home, or business up top and trackies down below. Building autonomy. Thank you, Lisa, for laughing at that. I'm just going to pop you on mute though. Flexibility, less travel, less expense on petrol and business clothing. Good one. Less interruptions, quiet space at home to focus, easier to get focus time, no one to walk past and interrupt. Yeah, it's one of the big benefits of hybrid work for many of us for that particular type of productivity. And it's interesting, across these two questions, we've talked about two different types of productivity. For that solo work productivity, many of us, myself included, find working from home to be incredibly beneficial to that. But the other type of productivity, the collaboration, the innovation, hybrid work presents challenges. So it's interesting to see that theme coming through. Less mother guilt from Bells, so that time to lean into other activities that we want to invest time in, whether it's family, hobbies, or whatever else it might be. If we're intentional in protecting the time we get back from not having the commute, as we've seen come through the chat, then there is the opportunity to lean into those other activities. But I wonder, and can I just get a quick show of hands, if you sometimes fall into the trap of that time where you would have been commuting and perhaps ideally would have used that time to invest in other areas of life, work has just expanded to fill that. Who stays online past their traditional work hours? Who's in that boat? Yeah, quite a few of us. I love, Julia, if you don't mind me saying, you kind of went like this. Yeah, that's me. Probably too much, but it's a common challenge, and we're going to look at some strategies we can do to combat that today. All right, so I might scroll up and we'll hear from at least one person. And Kat, you've dropped in flexibility and less travel, which popped up for a few different people. So just tell us, what does that give you back in terms of time and options? Yeah, nice. So simply getting that time back, that precious currency that we can never make more of, and the opportunity to invest it in other areas. So, and what I'm always very conscious of is that time we get back, we need to protect it. Because again, as we just saw with the show of hands, for so many of us, the challenge is that because we're working from home, sometimes we lose the sense that we're working from home and it feels more like we're living at work, which means that work can start to fill all of our outside of work hours. So we need to have strategies to create that transition. So look, thank you everyone for dropping into the chat function, and thank you for those who've jumped on the mic. What I'm really encouraged by is the challenges particularly that have been shared here echo the most significant challenges that I've had shared with me from leaders of virtual and hybrid teams over the last 3 years. So the three big ones that we're going to focus on today is Zoom fatigue, unmanageable inboxes, and simple digital overload. So can I get a quick show of hands if you're in that boat where sometimes you just feel like inundated with meeting requests and emails that there's actually no chance that you can be across it all and you don't know when you're going to do the actual work? Who fits in that boat? So basically everyone who's got their camera on and a few other people besides it has got their hands up. So we're going to look at a practical tool that you can complete within Teams to address this. The second challenge is health, wellbeing, and engagement. It's really interesting. When I ask about challenges and benefits of hybrid work, it tends to go one way or another, where for some of us, we say, well, I've got time back, so I'm able to invest in my wellbeing particularly. But for others, our established rhythms of work, which we built up across a work life of being in the office the vast majority of the time, well, they've been disrupted. And for many of us, that's habits like, let's say on the commute home, I go to the gym, which is something that I used to do when I was 5 days a week in an office when I wasn't traveling. And if we no longer have that commute and we're no longer passing the gym, we no longer have that cue for that habit of going to the gym, the risk is that we actually lose some of our well-being outcomes. So we're going to look at how we can protect that and drive a sense of connection and well-being and engagement across the team. And reinventing ourselves for an updated world of work. The top two challenges I'd suggest are largely symptomatic of the fact for many of us and for many organisations, what we've been trying to do across the last couple of years is apply ways of working that we've developed across our career into this new world of work. And it's almost like the software doesn't match up with the hardware. So we're going to look at ways that we can change our thinking and our ways of turning up and interacting with each other to better support sustainable and effective hybrid ways of working. So what we're going to draw from is our high-performing hybrid teams model, which you can see here. We look at both people and performance across the dimensions of psychology, methodology, technology, and 6 90-minute modules. So of course, we don't have that much time today. So we're going to draw from these 6 90-minute modules, and we're simply going to simplify it and looking at, well, what are the most important challenges and strategies to be aware of across psychology, so the way that we think about hybrid work, our beliefs and assumptions, our methodology, so the way that we do connect, the way that we do create the opportunity for social interactions, do create the opportunity for innovation, for collaboration, and technology. So we're not so much going to look at tech tools that I recommend that you go out and ask your organization to buy or invest in, because truthfully, I'm not that techie. What I am really keen to look at is the tech tools that we have available, how we use them. And particularly, not using any one tool or not overusing any one tool. I think of Zoom, Teams, or Meet, so video conference platforms. They're like a phenomenal hammer. They're a phenomenal tool, but they're not a drill. So they're not the right tool for every single job. And what we see is when we overuse them to replicate that over-the-shoulder 2-minute conversation that we would have had in the past, it saps our time, our energy, and our ability to do the work that sits outside of those meetings. So I've just seen in the chat function, if you pin my video, you'll see me the whole time. So for anyone who's not a Zoom native, if you have the gallery view where you can see lots of people right now, if you hover over me, and you'll see there's 2 blue boxes on the top right-hand corner. One of them says mute, please don't mute me, it'll hurt my feelings. And the other one with the 3 white dots, if you click that, it's the 5th or 6th option down, you can pin my video. Would I mind popping the slide back up again? Is this one? Natalie, is that the one you are looking to see? Perfect. All right. So we're going to begin looking at psychology of hybrid leadership. And sometimes this can be a little bit frustrating for people at first. And they go, well, just tell me the tech tools and the tactics that we need to use. But the reason we start with the psychology is simply, it is a fundamental fact of human nature that our psychology, so our beliefs, our assumptions, drive our behavior, which determine our results. So what we found time and time again over the last 3 years is that simply focusing on what we can do differently to get different results, it doesn't cut the mustard. The most successful organizations and the most successful teams have taken a step back and looked at, well, what are the beliefs that underpin our current ways of work, and do we need to adjust these? Do we need to re-examine these? Because if we think the way we've always thought, we'll do what we've always done and we'll get what we've always got. It means our thinking won't match up with our new context of work. And it's really interesting, when we look at the assumptions that have been built up around the viability of hybrid and virtual work over the last decade or so, a lot of people's minds were set in 2013, when Marissa Mayer, the at the time CEO of Yahoo, brought her people back to the office. What she said is, it's not working for us, this model, we need our people back co-located. And as you might expect, the tech giant Yahoo bringing their people back to the office because a hybrid methodology wasn't successful for them sent a ripple into the market where a lot of large organizations said it means hybrid and virtual work doesn't work. But what's really interesting, Marissa herself has gone on record several times since then saying it wasn't a comment on the viability of virtual or hybrid work. It was simply us acknowledging for Yahoo at that point in time, it wasn't the right model. And what's even more interesting is a quieter but no less significant voice across the last decade has been advocating for hybrid work. So Matt Mullenweg, the founder and CEO of Automatic, who owns WordPress. And by the way, if you're not familiar with WordPress, they host 43.1% of the websites that exist. 43.1% of the web hosted by this company, so pretty successful. And since their inception, they've been a hybrid organization, almost completely virtual, in fact, with very limited face-to-face interactions. And Matt has really advocated for the benefits, both in terms of cultural outcomes, well-being outcomes, but also performance outcomes when we successfully lean into hybrid work. So much and so, he's created his model, which he calls Distributed Work's 5 levels of autonomy. And he talks about level 0 down the bottom of this model as a job that physically cannot be done unless you're on site. So I think of my brother-in-law, Jesse. He's a carpenter. It's pretty hard for him to zoom into someone's living room and build them a custom piece of joinery. Level 1, though, is a work environment where there's been no deliberate effort to make it remote friendly. Now, this is where most organizations were pre-COVID, where you could probably get away with working from home maybe for an afternoon. Let's say your child had a sports carnival in the morning, you might be able to work from home in the afternoon. You could make phone calls, answer emails, but you probably didn't have access to the server, and you probably weren't going to be included in meetings. So you could only do it for a limited period of time. Whereas level 2 is where we're technologically set up for distributed work, but we're not culturally set up. And this is where most organizations are right now. We've invested in Teams or Slack, other tools, Miro, digital whiteboards to support hybrid and virtual work and collaboration. But for the large part, we're still trying to operate our face-to-face ways of working in a hybrid environment. And the symptoms of this we've already discussed. Massive Zoom fatigue, unmanageable inboxes. I get sent an important piece of information, but 2 weeks later, when I go back to try and find it, for the life of me, I don't know whether it was in an email, in a Slack channel, whether someone told me on Zoom, whether it's in a direct message. We simply don't have strong digital organization yet. And Matt would argue this is a symptom of we've got the technology to make hybrid work, but we haven't yet updated our culture to adapt to this new environment. We're still leaning into synchronous conversation. We feel like to get anything done, we need to be on a call together to make it happen. So it talks about the big jump is to level 3, where we become a remote first or hybrid first organization. So the jump from level 2 to level 3, it's a cultural jump. It's when we update our way of thinking and our assumptions about the way that work needs to work that we make that jump to level 3. So this is the jump that I've been partnering with organizations on over the last 3 years. And it's the jump that we're going to focus on and continue to focus on in our session right now. But to round out this model, level 4 is where things go truly asynchronous. And level 5, Matt calls nirvana, which is where a hybrid organization consistently outperforms any co-located organization. But even he admits that this might not be a possible destination, but it's a worthwhile point to aim for. But the key takeaway from this model is we have to update our cultural operating system. If we want to be successful and set up sustainable practice and hybrid work, it's our culture that we need to work on, because for most of us, we've got the tech tools to get it done. So the first tool that I want to share with you is looking at the identity of our team or potentially organization. Now, I'm really conscious that when I say the word identity, it can sound a little bit soft and fluffy. But our identity is the underlying psychological construct that gives us our sense of self. On an individual level, this is how we define ourselves the way we define ourselves. On a team level, this is who we believe we are as a collective. It's who we believe, what we believe that we value, what our strengths are, where we've been, but also where we're headed and what we're capable of. So our identity is made up of the stories we tell ourselves about our past, how we orient ourselves in the present, and our projection of the future. Do we have a sense of hope, of positive direction? And a thriving identity is one where these three states are in balance and work together. But what's really common is one of these states can be holding us back. So for example, a really common experience for new leaders is I get promoted to leadership, I have a few feedback conversations, and I don't do a very good job of it. They go quite poorly. And now I label myself as not very good at feedback, or maybe I'm not a people person. I'm good at the technical skills, but I'm not a people person. And that may have been true then, but it doesn't have to be true now. So our past state is holding us back in the present. And in the context of hybrid work, potentially it's, but this is the way we've always done things, or we're trying to replicate the way that we used to work, even though our present environment has changed. But we also need to have a sense of hope and positive direction for the future. Where are we heading, and what's the type of team or type of organisation that we want to be? Because what we understand from research is whether it's in life or in business, fixed identities lead to poor health. Or to put it somewhat philosophically, a quote that I love from Shah Henderson, to be twice the person you are, you need to leave half of yourself behind. And I would suggest that in the context of this conversation, to be twice the hybrid team we've been, we need to ask ourselves, what do we need to leave behind and who do we need to be? Now that sounds very high level and contextual, so to give you a practical tool, I'm going to send you through after this session the Team Identity Charter. Now this is an editable PDF. It scales pretty well, so you can blow it up and print it out as a poster, or you can complete it digitally with your team because you can type straight into it. And it asks us questions that are central to forming and evolving our identity as a team. So the first question is simply, what are our strengths as a team? It's always useful to take a strengths-based perspective. What's the important work we deliver for the business? So one of our greater intrinsic drivers is a sense of purpose and meaning. So always useful to ask the question, well, what's our connection to something bigger than ourselves? What are we contributing? Question 3, what do others value about us? So an outside looking in perspective. But the big one, question number 4, as a team, who do we need to be? And my encouragement is to work with your team to create a 1 to 2 sentence statement. And you'll note that this isn't what we need to do or how we need to get it done. This is, as a team, who do we want to be? And then down the bottom, there's a good old-fashioned behavioural compass. So on the left-hand side, what are we not doing when we're not operating well? And on the right-hand side, what are we doing when we are operating well? In other words, what are the behaviours that are going to help us get to that future version of ourselves? To give you an example of what it can look like, this was our first team identity charter post-COVID. I won't read through the whole thing, but for example, we said, as a team, who do we need to be? Well, we need to be a team that rally together and keep each other accountable, healthy, and happy. In terms of behaviours, this looked like when we're not operating well, we weren't calling out the stories in our heads and we bottled up feedback. But when we are operating well, our feedback culture is on point. We're having regular feedback, regular one-to-one conversations that drive connection, even though we're physically apart. So again, I'll send you through this blank version. My encouragement to you is to sit down with your team and complete this together. If you have a team that's any larger than, let's say, 3 or 4 people, my encouragement would be to not sit down and complete it all together, to break out into smaller groups. Now, you can do this all at the same time, or you can do this asynchronously, let's say over a week. But by completing a draft charter in groups of 2 to 3, it ensures that even the quieter, the more introverted, the people who are less likely to contribute, particularly on a Zoom call, it ensures their voice is captured in the charters. And then you come together and you combine your charters to create the master charter, so to speak. And it also shouldn't be one and done. This is a tool that we should, just like our identity, be working on regularly, so you might complete this once a quarter or even once a year. So keeping on the psychology of hybrid leadership, keen to share with you a mindset. Going back to WordPress, that they encourage internally. And they talk about a different kind of API. And by the way, for those of you who aren't the techiest, much like me, API is a programming term that stands for Application Programming Interface. So I'm told it has a lot of meaning in the tech world. But they talk about a different type of API, which is always assuming positive intent. Now, if you were here for dealing with the tough stuff, you might remember generosity of assumption. So it's a similar mindset, but this one might match your palate a little bit more. But always assuming positive intent is simply about making the active choice to assume that other people aren't actively trying to aggravate us or try to be difficult when they present with behaviors that we find challenging. Now, the reason this is so particularly important in a hybrid environment is going back to the way that we've always formed, strengthened, and grown relationships is by being in the same physical environment. We observe each other. So if I send my colleague Dylan an email and he doesn't respond for 2 or 3 hours, if we're in the office together and I can look over and I can see he's deep in editing a video or he's on a client call, I'm going to give him grace because I can see why he hasn't gone back to me. Whereas if I'm working in Brisbane and he's working on the Gold Coast, which is most often the case, well, there's opportunity when he doesn't get back to me for 2 or 3 hours for questions to start to pop up in my mind because it's the unknown, and we invent stories when the facts are unknown. So I could assume that he's ignoring my email. I could assume that he doesn't want to talk to me about it. Maybe I might even ask myself, do I need to call him and check in with him? Is he okay? So when we're not together, there's so many opportunities for negative assumptions to pop up. So this mindset is simply about making the active choice to assume that positive intent, where we're given the choice. It's not that we put on rose-tinted glasses that are so tinted that we ignore the reality, but given the choice, we exercise it. Really closely linked to this, though, is because there's an onus on us to do 2 things. The first onus is to assume positive intent, but there's also an onus on us to conduct ourselves in a way within a hybrid team that encourages other people to have positive assumptions of us. And it can be really useful to have a conversation within your team around what we can do to manage our perceptions of each other. Because acknowledging that if we go back to something we looked at for dealing with the tough stuff, that masterclass, only 7% of meaning in conversation is communicated by the words that we say. Only 7% of meaning in conversation is communicated by the words that we say. 38% is our voice, our tone, our tempo, and a whopping 55% is our body language. So if we can't see each other, there's so much context that's missing in how we turn up and interact with each other. So what I want to share with you now is 3 rules of engagement we've set for ourselves as a team at Pragmatic Thinking. So these 3 are 3 rules of communication. Now, these aren't to suggest that you should take these 3 rules exactly and use them with your team, although please feel free to, but these might serve as a useful starting point for the conversation you might have with your team about mapping out, well, how are we going to turn up and interact with each other so we have consistency, so we're on the same page. So the first rule of engagement that we hold is to leave nothing unanswered. Quite simply, if we reach out to each other, if I have a missed call on my phone, I will get back to the person who's reached out to me. We hold that shared commitment that we won't leave the other person hanging. And what ties in quite directly to this is we tighten the feedback loop. So we get back to each other as soon as is practically possible. And emphasis on the word practically. It doesn't mean that if I see my phone go off with a phone call or a text message right now, that I'm going to be like, excuse me, everyone, I just need to get back to my colleague right now. Doesn't mean we drop everything else, but we get back to each other as soon as we can. Because, again, there's the opportunity if we don't get back to someone for a couple of days because it slipped our mind and we're not physically in the same office, it means that it's still on the other person to have to reach out to us to follow up. Now, of course, this needs to be balanced with addressing the unmanageable inboxes and the being tagged in too many posts on Slack or in Microsoft Teams. So we're going to come back to that towards the end of this session. So leave nothing unanswered, tighten the feedback loop, and the last one is simply to call out success. we're really conscious that another one of our big intrinsic drivers is progress. When we achieve progress and we perceive that as a group we're getting stuff done, that in and of itself, it's a motivator. Now the challenge is that if we're not physically in the same space, first of all for me, if I have a bit of a win, if I was in the office with my colleagues, I'd probably tell them, or they'd probably have a sense what I was working on, so we could have a bit of a celebration, maybe a high five, or even just a simple acknowledgement. But if I'm sitting at my desk by myself, working from home, there's the opportunity for that success to completely go unacknowledged. So I don't get that sense of progress. But it also means that the rest of the team doesn't have the collective sense of progress. We like to be part of a team that's winning. I mean, I'm speaking to people who probably understand this better than almost anyone else, right? We like to be part of a team that's winning. Whatever winning looks like for us and in our industry, in our line of work, we like to feel like we're succeeding. And so proactively sharing those success stories is incredibly important in a hybrid and virtual team. So I'm going to put up these three. Leave nothing unanswered, tighten the feedback loop, and call out success. Now, you might just drop into the chat function a 1, a 2, or a 3. Can I invite you to drop in which of these, if you've been honest and you're looking at it, you go, I probably could do a better job of that. That's something I could do a better job of. So when you're ready, drop into the chat function. Which of these jumps out as one that Corey's going, all of them. We've got call out success, we've got tighten the feedback loop, we've got leaving nothing unanswered. More 1s, 2s, and 3s, so support or acknowledgement rather of all 3 of these. So while responses continue to come through, I'm going to scroll up and Corey, you've dropped in all, but I'm going to invite you to jump on the chat function and just tell us about why one of these stood out for you. So you don't have to go through all 3, but just tell us, maybe leaving nothing unanswered. Why did that jump out for you as something you could work on improving? So first of all, great awareness and humility and being open to receiving that feedback, right? It's not always, well, it's often not fun, but the fact that you've acknowledged it and you've called it out in this forum, like, I just want to say, good on you. And let me encourage you that, and this is for everyone on this call, I can't think of a single organization that I've ever worked with that when I've talked about the importance of calling out success, people haven't gone, we need to do that better and we need to do more of it. It's something that is so easy to overlook in a busy work environment where we do, once we complete a task, we're on to the next, that it is one of the fundamental intrinsic drivers and motivators for us as human beings. And actually a phenomenal piece of advice or reflection I was given by a former professional NRL player when I did some work with him. He said, Ryan, the best coaches I ever played with or played for, they recognise that people will turn up just as much for their second paycheck as their first, which is that pat on the back and that recognition. So it's a phenomenal call out, Corey. I really appreciate it. And on that consistency piece, when we've got some people who work from home more often, some people are in the office, I reckon that's where the real value of a team identity charter and having these rules of engagements can be. Because the challenge is when we're physically together, human beings are pretty good at just figuring out the way things are done around here because we just observe each other. But when I work from home and I don't see other people working from home and I don't see the people who are working from the office, I fall into my own established rhythms of behavior, and that may or may not serve the team really well. So having these principles which we agree that this is how we're going to operate, this is what's going to allow the team to succeed, it can really go a long way. And it can feel uncomfortable because in the past we may not have needed to be as explicit as this. But when we can't rely on that 93% to help us form our behaviors, it can be really valuable. So thank you so much for jumping on the mic and sharing. And I might go to Kim Williams. You've dropped in tightening the feedback loop. Why did that jump out for you? And I can hear in your voice, if you don't mind me saying that, the counterpoint to this is you've got a lot on and a lot of requests. So it's often really challenging to get back to people. So So I hope the final part of this masterclass will add some value there. But I also really like how you said sometimes it can be communicating about the timeframes that you can get back to people. So for us internally, tightening the feedback loop doesn't mean when someone asks me to film a video, for example, it doesn't mean I drop everything and do that as quickly as possible. It can mean, hey, I will have capacity to do this on Friday and I'll get it to you by COB on Friday. That's what I'm getting back to them with as quickly as possible, so they can tick it off their mental list, so to speak, and not feel like they have to follow up. So it's a good call out. Thanks, Kim. I appreciate it. And thank you again, everyone, for dropping into the chat function. We're going to keep moving, and we're going to move now to looking at the methodology of hybrid leadership. So the way that we work and the way that we connect in many ways. And we're specifically going to look at rhythms and rituals that drive the cultural outcomes of well-being, performance. I'd add in here connection and engagement. Now, if you think back to our Science of Recovery masterclass, we acknowledge the fact that 40 to 50% of our day is made up of habits. 40 to 50% of our day is made up of behaviors that we've completed so many times that they've simply become automated and habitual. And John Dryden sums up the opportunity and the danger of this in his quote that we first make our habits and then our habits make us. So I think simply about the compounding effect of something as simple as a daily walk. So for example, let's say your method of operating in the past is you'd commute home from work. When you got home, you'd get changed and you'd go for a walk. But now you work from home a lot of the time, so that cue for that behavior is gone. If you don't go for that walk one day, not a big deal. But if you miss that walk 5 days in a week, you probably feel pretty off. If you miss that walk for the next year because the cue for the habit is gone, you'll be a different human being. On the flip side, if we use some of the flexibility and the advantages of hybrid work to build in a walk into our schedule that we haven't had in the past, well, you go for that one walk, not much changes, you might feel good about yourself, but you go for 5 walks in a week, you'll feel really good about yourself. But if you add that walk in 3 to 4 days a week, 52 weeks in a year, by the end of the year, you'll be a different person. So there's so much up for grabs in creating habits, both personal and professional at a team level in a hybrid environment. But the challenge is, for many of us, we've developed habits that aren't serving us as well. So what I'm keen to share with you is 4 daily rhythms that I'd offer to you as both as rhythms that you can put in place for yourself, but also rhythms that you can put in place with your team and encourage them to either do individually or collectively. So the first rhythm is simply to bookend your day with transitions. Can I just get a quick show of hands, either on your camera or you might just put the Zoom up emoji, who finds themselves fairly frequently when, let's say you would have finished work in the office at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, the time that you would have had for a commute, you just keep working, or you find yourself checking emails and Slack late at night. Who's in that boat? Yeah, lots of us. And that's because for so many of us, we've lost the sense that we're working from home and we now feel that we're living at work because work is starting to dominate the other areas of life. So to put a stop to this, we have to be intentional in giving ourselves something that marks that divide between work and the rest of life. So personally, that looks like a walk for me. So I often like to step out of the house in the morning and then step back into work. Sometimes I'll skip that. But in the evening, for me to switch off from work, to stop processing what I've just done for the day and switch into my family life, I also go for a walk. If I'm feeling really energetic, so my wife and I will go for a 60-minute walk. Some days it's just a 5-minute walk, but we're really diligent about stepping out of the house and then stepping back in, but we've stepped out of work and now we're stepping into our home life. And it's incredibly useful to create that mental separation. Another strategy that I've had shared with me is writing down your to-do list for the next day as your last order of business. Tim Ferriss described in his book, The 4-Hour Workweek, preoccupation as the worst possible state, because you're not being productive and getting stuff done, but you're thinking about getting the stuff that you need to get done when you should be relaxing, so you're not actually relaxing. So it's this horrible in-between state. So sometimes getting the information out of our head and down into a piece of paper allows us to make that mental switch and step into our family life or our friend, hanging out with friends or engaging with hobbies, and be more present and engaged with that. So bookending our day with transitions, but I'm now going to share with you 3 other rhythms that map to times in the day. So the first is simply to win the morning. And we're going to go into this one in a little bit more detail in a moment because it tends to be the most popular. But at a high level, winning the morning is all about starting off your day with intentionality, with progress, and being a planner before you become a doer. Setting up your day for success before you get caught up in the momentum of other people's expectations. Whereas seizing the midday is actually intentionally stepping away from work. So this is actually having a lunch break, often for many people, even 15 minutes away from your desk. It's not only does that so good for our well-being, it actually helps us perform and be more creative, to be sharper and to be more productive for the rest of the day. So investing in that recovery in the middle of the day, so we're taking care of ourselves, but also so we're more effective for the rest of the day. And something that we do as a team is we've made this a team rhythm, where when we seize the midday, often we take a photo of it and we share it on Slack, our internal social media platform. Now the reason for that is, if I seize the midday by reading a book, if I seize the midday by getting out for a walk or doing 30 minutes of exercise, and then I share that with the rest of my team, it makes it okay for the rest of the team to do it as well. It reinforces that we are a culture who values doing this. So if I do it, it's okay for you to do it, and when you do it in post as well, it makes it more okay for me to do it. So we make it a team rhythm. So win the morning, seize the midday, and the last is crafternoon. So crafternoon is about switching the type of work we're doing. If you find yourself getting into a bit of a mental or energetic rut towards the end of the day, it's about 3 o'clock usually for me, sometimes simply switching tasks can be really useful. So I've been focused on this report for an hour and a half. I'm going to go and do something different for 10 or 15 minutes. Something else that I really recommend as a crafternoon activity is actively investing in developing your skills. So it's not necessarily about productivity today, but developing your skills for the future. So often what I will do for crafternoon is I will watch a TED Talk for 15 minutes or look at a LinkedIn Learning. So it's not about productivity, but it's developing me for the future, and it's helping me just reset. Because if I've been focused on one thing for too long, as we all know, the closer to it you get, the harder it is to see the details. Taking that step and looking at something different can help us come back to that other work and approach it with fresh perspective. So win the morning, seize the midday, and crafternoon. As I mentioned, I'm keen to go into win the morning in a little bit more detail because it tends to be, for most people, where there's the most up for grabs. So we're first of all going to look at strategies that you could employ to win the morning as an individual. And then in the next slide, we'll look at strategies to win the morning as a team. So first of all is to simply wake up at a consistent time. So we have 2 internal drivers of our sleep cycle. One of them is our sleep pressure system. The other is our circadian rhythm. This is our internal biological clock that we can only adjust by maximum of an hour a day. And if we do that on back-to-back days, it's really hard for our system to adjust. So the challenge is, if you're someone like me, and when you have to commute into the office like I have today to be here, I have to get up at around about 5 a.m. to get here on time. Whereas when I'm working from home, really tempting to roll out of bed at like 8:25 and be ready to go at 8:30. But it's too much for my system to adjust. So if I try to have drastically different times that I wake up, depending on whether I'm in the office or working from home that day, the pressure I'm placing on my system is significant. To give you an idea of how significant this is, when daylight savings means that collectively we're getting an hour less sleep, for the next 2 weeks we see heart attack rates increase by around 24%. So it shows the pressure that it places on our system by having a lot of variation in when we wake up and go to bed. I'm just going to pop you on mute. There we go. Secondly, follow a routine, regardless of whether we work from home or in office. So again, acknowledging that we are creatures of habit, we like homeostasis. If you, let's say, listen to music or listen to a podcast when you come into the office, that's probably part of your transition into work. When you're working from home, to give yourself that same sense of transition, so work and life don't bleed into each other, you might do something like reading a book or listening to a podcast, or like I do, stepping out and going for a 10, 15-minute walk, just to help create that mental transition. Having dedicated work clothes. Now, I will be honest, this isn't necessarily for everyone, but I'm the kind of person that I form strong associations to people, to places, and to clothes. What I mean by that is this is a work jacket. I will not wear this outside of work because when I put this on, I feel like I'm at work. Now, what that means is the clothes that I wear for work at home, I need them to be different to the clothes that I'm wearing when I'm relaxing at home. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't wear trackies to work from home. I just have my work trackies and my non-work trackies. So having those different set of clothes, it's part of my ritual at the end of the day. I take off my work clothes and I get changed. And again, it helps me switch on and off. Plan before doing. So I never thought I'd quote Matthew McConaughey in professional development sessions, but I'm going to do it. In one of the podcasts I was listening to, and where he was being interviewed for his book Green Lights, he talks about one of his, air quotes, keys to success is to start his day by planning what he wants to get out of it before he gets caught up in what other people want him to do and want to get out of it. So this could be simply before you have your first meeting, before other people come into the office, just sitting down and going, well, what are my top priorities for the day? So being a planner before you're doing, get caught up with other people's expectations. And block out your hour of power. So time blocking, it's a pretty well-known strategy, but I personally find it most effective at the start of the day. So this is putting time in my calendar in advance where I'm going to be productive. So this is time where please don't book a meeting, please don't call me. It doesn't mean that you can't ever, but this is time when I'm focused on deep solo work. And particularly if you raised your hand before in response to the challenge of having back-to-back Zoom or video conference meetings, we need to block in our hour of power in advance. So you might not be able to block it in for tomorrow, but I wonder if you can go into your calendar and book it for next week or next month. And an hour of power may not be possible, but my encouragement is if you can't do it for 60 minutes, even 15 minutes is a whole lot better than 0 minutes. So finding that time to start your day with progress and get that intrinsic reward in the neurochemical dopamine and start your day with that momentum. Nice. Now, their strategy is to win the morning as an individual, but we can also make this a team and collective activity. So a couple of suggestions you might consider for winning the morning as a team is a synchronous check-in. So a synchronous check-in is where we all jump on a Zoom, a Teams, at the same time, or if we're in the office together, gather around a table together and we check in with each other. And something I always encourage is to think of novel and different ways that you can check in with your team. Something that being a counsellor taught me is the quality of the question informs the quality of the response. So this can be checking in with people, not just on their work, it can be asking them to drop into the Zoom chat function an emoji that they can use to describe their week so far, which simply is hilarious when someone inevitably drops in a poo emoji. But it's a good way to get that feedback. How are our people traveling? Is there someone who we might need to check in with after this? Asking them to rate how they're feeling today on a scale of 1 to 10. because when people walk into the office, you can usually tell when someone's having a rough day, right? But when we're not co-located, the challenge is, Becca, are you going to jump on the mic? I just saw you go off mute. There might have been an accident. I'll just pop you on mute. The challenge is that when we can't see our people, we might not know when to check in. The other challenge is that when I have a rough morning, let's say I'm a 3 out of 10 and I walk into the office, chances are that the rest of the team's going to pick me up. It's that energetic safety net. But if I'm a 3 out of 10 and I'm working from home alone, a really rough morning can become a really rough day. So having that synchronous check-in, we can also do as asynchronous check-in. So rather than jumping on yet another Zoom call, if you're feeling overwhelmed by the amount of video meetings that we have, it can be dropping into a Slack or Teams channel. What's a movie that you can use to describe your week? What's an emoji? What are the top 3 things that are front of mind for you in terms of priorities this week? And so people can drop in their answer when they have an opportunity. Something that we did this week is we have a dedicated channel and we each have dropped in a short video acknowledging 2 people in the team that we want to call up for having really helped us out for the last couple of weeks. So it's a fun and a different way of being able to express where we are, but also acknowledge the wins across the team. A focus and activity update, so we could have less of a social check-in and more of a work-related check-in. Hands up. So hands up is a value that we have as a team at Pragmatic Thinking, and what it means is once a week we have a dedicated time where we can do one of 2 things. The first is to put our hand up and ask for help because we don't understand something, we don't have capacity to do something, we need someone to collaborate with us, but also have the opportunity to put up our hand and say, hey, I have some capacity on Thursday afternoon. Does anyone need some help? And what's really interesting is by having that dedicated time for it, like it's set aside, we all know it's coming each and every week, means that we do it. Whereas if we didn't have that time, the chances are that we'd just be caught up in the busyness. We complete one task, then we're on to the next. So having that dedicated time to put our hand up and ask for help or offer help. And the team version of the hour of power is the unplugged hour. So this could be, as a team, we agree that between 10 and 11 a.m., for example, we don't have video conference meetings. We encourage our external and internal stakeholders to not have meetings at that time. This is where collectively, wherever possible, we're focusing on our solo work so we can be as productive as possible. So look, we've looked at quite a few strategies for winning the morning as an individual and as a team, and we've looked at 4 strategies across the day, bookending our day with the transition, winning the morning with productivity and intentional planning, seizing the midday by getting away from our work, and crafternoon by simply switching up the type of work that we're doing. Question I've got for you is simply, what can you introduce to your personal practice? What could you take from this? And actually, let's expand it. Let's do personal and leadership. So what's something you can do for yourself, and what's something you could introduce with your team? So I'll invite you to reflect for a couple of moments. I'll leave this chat function open for a bit. And when you're ready, drop into the chat function, what could you introduce for your own personal practice, and what could you introduce to your team? And I just seen, Julie, you've dropped in, our team does the hour of power. We block it out as GSD, get stuff done time. I'm not sure I believe you that it's get stuff done time, but that's okay. And it's respected within the team. Good on you. It's a phenomenal practice to have in place. And I can see responses are coming through. Personal hour of power from Christine, and the team, the hands up ritual. From Julie, the asynchronous check-in and hands up. From Ebony, I set teams to not ping while I'm focusing. Then I set time aside to look at the team's emails. I follow the philosophy that surgeons don't get chats while they're operating on a patient. It is expected that they need time to focus. So why are we not given the same courtesy? I love it, Ebony. And it's a question I'd encourage you and everyone on this call to reflect on. Well, how can we clearly set that expectation across our team? How can we make that something that we rally around and that we really understand and we value in each other? How can we make that a cultural practice? Changing clothes from Annalise, just one of my people. Personal, so from Nicola, creating that transition. From Corey, personal, team transitions, clear transitions. And for the team, asynchronous check-in, but that everyone sees, not just me. Nice. From Badminton Australia, my personal practice is pretty good. Wake up at the same time, work out, breakfast, kids ready for schoolwork, etc. For the team, we could do with a better daily practice. We're a bit more ad hoc with different ideas of sharing emojis, memes, at the start or the end of the week. Nice. From Kate, we've got the hour of power and the hand up. So look, I think responses are continuing to come through, but I'm looking at the time, and in the interest of it, we'll keep going. So we're now going to look at the third and final part of our masterclass today, which is focus on technology. So looking at addressing 3 significant challenges that I hear time and time again of the tech that we have available, but the way that we're using it. So the first is simply video conference fatigue, and we've talked about this a fair bit today. Second is unmanageable inboxes, where we, rather than having that 2-minute face-to-face conversation, maybe we send an email these days. And particularly for leaders, we just have an unmanageable amount of emails to get back to, and contaminated or disorganized channels. So I'm going to ask for another quick show of hands here. Who has had that experience that you know you've received a piece of information, maybe it was last week, but for the life of you, you cannot remember whether someone shared it online on Slack, whether it was in an email, whether it was on a Zoom meeting, maybe even they've called you up and told you. So you have to trawl through for an hour or two to find that information. Who can relate to that? Yeah, lots of us. Seeing lots of hands go up, lots of emojis go up on the Zoom tiles as well. So what we're going to look at is optimizing our use of platforms. And we're going to look to optimize them along 2 dimensions. So the first is optimizing them for connection. And if I were to give you a hierarchy of how we should use our tools for connection, even in front of video conference, face-to-face is going to trump video conference, is going to trump a phone call, is going to trump email, is going to trump text. Remembering that only 7% of how we communicate meaning is the words that we say. 93% is nonverbal. So the more of those nonverbals we can bring into the conversation, the more connection there's going to be. So face-to-face, and then video conference, where we can hear people's voices and see their facial expressions and hands. Then phone call, where we can hear their voice before the simply text-based tools. Having said that, connection is just one dimension. The other big one we want to look at is efficiency. Because of course, being in the same physical space or jumping on a Zoom, it's great to be able to see and hear each other, but it's going to clog up our calendars if that's all we ever do. So we're going to look at an acronym that helps us create order in how we use our platform. So the acronym is SOX, and SOX simply stands for social, operational, conversational, and speed. So asking the question, what are the platforms that we're going to use to connect socially? What are the platforms we're going to use to connect operationally, conversationally, and at speed? Now, the differentiation between the 4. Social, fairly intuitive. This is a dedicated space for us to connect as human beings. Not to discuss the work, but just to build that connection, build relationship, invest in the culture. Whereas operational, this is going to tend to be tools like a Jira, a Monday.com, potentially email. Where conversational is different from social, social is not about the work. Conversational is. But it's where we want to have this back and forth collaborative conversation that is different to, let's say, simply tracking project status, which we might do in our operational platform. So conversational, it's where we want to have this more free-flowing back and forth. And speed, as it suggests, it's simply when we want to get a hold of each other as quickly as possible. So I want to share with you some examples of tools that we find might fit in each of these 4 categories. Not to suggest you should go out and invest in any of these, but just to see where we see most of these common platforms fall. So starting with social platforms, this might look like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, particularly, well, it could either be the video conference function or having a dedicated social channel, Google Meets, Skype, Slack video calls, and even WhatsApp. We've heard a couple of clients use quite a lot. Operational platforms, this might look like Jira, Trello, Notion, Monday.com. Conversational platforms, Slack, particularly Slack channel, that's what we leverage a lot. So not jumping on a Zoom call and having a verbal conversation, we have dedicated channels focused on dedicated projects. And you could do the same in Microsoft Teams, and Shanty and Flock are lesser known platforms as well. For connecting at speed, text, good old-fashioned phone call, and the often underestimated carrier pigeon. Now, if you think I'm making a bad joke there, you clearly haven't heard of Winston, the South African pigeon who outperformed their internet in 2009. Thank you for like the 3 people who laughed at that really bad joke. I do appreciate it. But the big takeaways from this model is, first of all, we want to use the right tool for the job. So again, if we think of a tool like a video conference, it's kind of like the best hammer you can buy. It's phenomenal, but it's not what we need to use for every type of collaboration whenever we need to work on a project together. Secondly, we want to avoid contaminating our channels. And what I mean by this is we form associations to people, we form associations to spaces, and we can form associations to digital spaces as well. So a really common occurrence is we have a Monday morning meeting where we talk about 2 things. We talk about what we've got on this week, and we also just connect socially and check in with each other. But what we find is when we talk about both the work and connect socially, the work will start to dominate the social. It starts to contaminate it and it makes intuitive sense. What brings us together is work, so it makes sense that when we've got the 2 together, the work will start to take over. But then the risk is we're not investing in the culture, and there's all sorts of risks associated with that. And the last is simply getting clear on what goes where. Having digital organization, so we know that if I've received this type of information, this is where it's likely to be. So the last digital tool, so editable PDF that I'll have sent through to you today, is the Tech Connect tool. So it invites you to sit down with your team and map out, well, what are the platforms that we can use to connect socially, operationally, conversationally, and at speed. But the added layer is, what are our guidelines for each of these? So for example, for us as a team, one of our guidelines is email is an operational platform, but we want to give each other the opportunity to look at our emails at a very high level and know which ones we need to focus on first. So the first word of our email subject lines within the team tells you what it's about. Is this a simple FYI? Is this urgent? Is there an action associated with it? We make that the first line of the email subject line. So it allows us to look at it at a high level and know what's going on in our inbox. We also know, for example, that if we send each other an email, you need to give the other person at least a day to get back to you, even if it's urgent, about 24 hours. Whereas if we have a text message or a phone call or a missed call on our phone, we know that's well and truly speed. If someone in the team has picked up the phone and tried to give us a call, that's them saying, I need to get a hold of you as quickly as possible. And because we've clearly mapped that out, it allows us to be much more efficient, but it also just allows us to have that shared understanding of what we can expect from each other. So I'm actually going to go full screen with this, and we've done pretty well for time. So what I'm going to invite you to do is either take a screenshot or take a picture of that, because we're going to get into breakout rooms. And in our breakout rooms, I'm going to invite you to discuss, and I'm going to make the breakout rooms decent size, because I'm conscious that a midday masterclass, there might be some of us who've been pulled away. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at this together, and I'm simply going to ask you to discuss where are the opportunities for you to optimize your use of platforms within your team. So it might be that we simply need to have clarity around what we use to connect socially, operationally, conversationally at speed. Or it could be we need to have clearer and more firm guidelines for how we use each of these tools. It might be that when we send through an invitation for a Zoom or Teams meeting, the invitation needs to come with a meeting agenda, as an example. So I'm going to have rooms of about 3 to 4 people. But before we dive into the breakout rooms, can I just get a quick thumbs up, if that makes sense, ready to rock and roll, and a hand raise if there's any questions or concerns, or you might drop into the chat function. Cool. All right, it looks like it's all thumbs up. So I've set the breakout rooms to have, actually I'll make them even slightly larger. So there'll be 4 to 5 people in there. So we're going to go into for a bit over 5 minutes, and then we'll come back together, and I'll be keen to hear from at least 1 or 2 groups. If you haven't been in a Zoom breakout room before, the way it's going to work is when I click create, it'll send you into the breakout rooms. When I click close, you'll see a 60-second countdown. It's usually like the top center of your screen. If you click the button, it'll bring you back straight away. So my encouragement is don't click the button, let it count all the way down. And then when it gets to 0, it'll bring us all back together at the same time. I'll see you soon. All right, looks like we're all back. So everyone, it's always a bit dangerous when people come back either laughing or with massive grins on their face. So I always get a bit nervous about what was going on in that breakout room. But I'm keen to hear from at least 1 or 2 people. So I'm going to go to someone who I haven't spoken to yet. Kate Hodgson, you've won Zoom Bingo. You are right on the top left of my screen. So I'm going to throw it over to you. What came up in your group's discussion, and was there anything particular that stood out for you as an opportunity to optimize your team's platform use? Yeah, nice. And what they sound to me is they're 2 small tweaks that can make a world of difference. So being conscious of in these social interactions, and it's a really effective way to build psychological safety within a team as well, is to literally go around and give every single person space to speak. And sometimes a good practice as a leader is make sure I go last. I love that reflection, and just that tweak around how do we communicate who's on site, who's off site can go a long way as well. Thanks for sharing. And I'm going to go to Christine Gates. What came up in your discussion? Yeah, nice. And to be honest, like whatever definition you arrive on, like it doesn't matter so much. It's more the conversation around and setting those channel guidelines, right? This is what we're going to use this for, and this is our digital hygiene guidelines, so to speak, to make sure that we are being efficient, that we creating space for the conversations that matter, and we know where information goes. So I like it. Thanks for sharing. All right, we have 5 minutes left on our allotted time. So I'm going to do an incredibly brief recap, and then I'm going to ask you one last question, which is simply, what are you going to take away from this session and look to put into practice in your hybrid leadership practice? But we started off looking at the psychology of hybrid leadership and the team identity charter as a tool that we can use to work with our team to ask the question, well, who do we need to be as a team? And is that different to who we needed to be in 2022? I'd imagine it needs to be quite different to who we needed to be in 2019. So it's a dedicated tool for us to have a discussion around team dynamics and what we need to do to support growth and ensuring that we're becoming the best version of ourselves possible. Assuming positive intent, so API, so making that proactive and active choice when we can't see each other, when we're not in the same physical space, to assume that the other people in our team are turning up with positive intentions, and that's absolutely going to impact how we turn up and interact with them. Rules of engagement, so setting up communication guidelines within your team. So for us at Pragmatic Thinking, these are simply to leave nothing unanswered, tighten the feedback loop, and call out success. We looked at 4 daily rhythms to support engagement, well-being, connection, and performance. So creating a transition, bookending your day with consciously stepping into work, and at the end of the day, consciously stepping out of work into the rest of life. We also looked at winning the morning with productivity and a sense of progress, seizing the midday by having and ensuring we have a break and supporting each other to do so, and crafternoon, getting out of that mental rut we can often find ourselves in at the end of the day by switching up our work. And where we finished our conversation today was on platform optimization. So getting clear on what platforms we use to connect socially, operationally, conversationally, and at speed, and setting up clear guidelines within the team for how we're going to use each of these key platforms. So I can see people taking notes. I'm just going to leave that up for just one more moment. But as we finalize our notes, the question that I have for you is, what's been your big standout? What can you implement in your hybrid leadership practice? So I'll invite you to reflect briefly and drop into the chat function. What's your big aha moment? What's your big takeaway? What can you take away and implement from this masterclass? So Corey's dropped in the team identity charter. Nice. The rules of engagement. From Alex, I'm not a leader in my team, but I look forward to our team discussing some of these ideas and trying some on for size. Good on you, Alex. From Julia, setting expectations and agreed ways of operating, and the weekly hand up rhythm as well. From Annalise, it's a worthwhile conversation to have with colleagues to work effectively, and the tools are valuable. I like the Tech Connect tool. Nice. End of day to-do list for tomorrow, platform definitions, muting channels, booked lunch breaks. Nice. Heaps of takeaways there, Kim. From Sarah, work with the team on the identity charter and platform optimization. Both will help us get on the same page, and conversations will help us to get to know each other and understand expectations. Nice. And look, as answers continue to drop into the chat function, I'm conscious that it is 1:29, and I'm sure that plenty of us have other Zoom meetings or Teams meetings to go after this. So simply let me say thank you. I appreciate your time today and your time for the last 2 masterclasses that we had together. Liz, I want to give you a huge shout out. Thanks for being my partner in crime for setting these up and making sure I'm well briefed and set up for success for these. So thank you. By the way, if you don't have them, here's my contact details. If you have any questions or would like me to send you through any other resources, please don't hesitate to reach out. But thanks, and I do hope to see you again in future. Cheers.